All right. Cool. How's it going? Today we are going to kind of pick up where we left off with the Gatsby site build a couple weeks ago. I, it's been a couple weeks since we streamed that, but hopefully it'll be easy enough to kind of pick back up where we left off. I kind of went through a couple things before we started here just to kind of set a few things up and move us along a little bit quicker. We're not going to do too much today, just going to kind of go through a couple of the smaller useful like setup bits before we go too much further. Like next week, I want to like have a bit of a strategy for like the design and the direction that we actually want to take the site. So yeah, 2 weeks in between the last stream and now should have been enough time for me to do that, but naturally things are a little bit crazy, so I didn't have too much time to do that. But in any case, I'll try and get something pulled together for next week so that we can start actually building out some of the more design centered elements on the page. But a couple things that we're going to go through today. The first thing being just like some basic like document head management. So things like metadata, like if you wanted to add some sort of like OG tags for like social media stuff, whether it's for like Twitter or Facebook, you can do that within the head here. Gatsby offer by default, it's a little bit weird within Gatsby to try to manage stuff in the header. So like if you wanted to add Google fonts, for example, or like analytics tracking codes and script tags and stuff like that, stuff that you would normally be able to just throw into like an index file in the within a head tag, is a little bit different to manage when Gatsby is compiling down all of your files into static assets. So we're going to figure that out, and then we're just going to kind of go through and build out a couple small like layout components for the site, containers and things like that, so that the content within the window isn't all the way here to the left. We'll set a max width on it and kind of center everything so that we actually have a little bit of a content area to work with, and then we'll put components and stuff within that container, and that'll probably do it. So that's kind of just the high level overview of what we're gonna run through today. Just to kind of show you a couple things that I did before we started here. I went through some color palettes just to kind of choose a set of colors that I liked, and we'll see how it ends up panning out when we actually build out some components and stuff. But I threw together a modified version of one of the picked colors from the cooler generator here. I'll drop that in the chat. And I for purely aesthetic reasons, like this color palette, this isn't necessarily set in stone. So like I said, as we go through building out the components and stuff, we might change this up a little bit, but we will see. I translated all of these using just the name that Cooler provided, set up some different variable names, added the hex values for those colors, and exported them like we went over a couple weeks ago. So that's all set up. If we look at the index page, you can see we still have this test component that I'm going to go ahead and remove from here in a minute once we actually get our container component set up. We might actually end up even just using the layout component and styling the layout component a little more. I guess it kind of depends on what we want to do there, because there's definitely going to be cases where we want some components to stretch the full width of the browser. So leveraging that within the layout component may not be the best idea, but we'll kind of get into that towards the end here today. So yeah, I changed some of the colors up a little bit, and I think that was really about it. Just added the background color to our site resets styled component. Yeah, that's about it. One of the things that I want to do, and this is kind of what spurred the desire to jump into figuring out how to like do document header management stuff, is add some Google fonts to the site, because this lovely Arial's a sans serif, whatever this is, this default this default font family obviously is not the best. So I picked out a couple of font faces from Google Fonts that I think will look pretty good. Again, I'm just kind of winging this without any like real style direction or design or anything like that. This pairing down here seemed to look pretty nice to me, so I just kind of went with it, and we will figure out how to add this into the head. Did a little bit of research before, and I'll actually search specifically Gatsby React Helmet. The kind of go-to solution, it seems like, for managing document header stuff is React Helmet. It's within the Gatsby. There are some tutorials and a little bit of documentation around examples and stuff using React Helmet on the Gatsby site, so that's probably what we will leverage here today, and we can kind of just jump right into it. So kind of similar to how we installed styled components and stuff, we're going to install a couple of plugins, the base React Helmet npm package and the Gatsby specific version of that. I'll just go ahead and copy and paste that into terminal. And play the hold music while we let this stuff install. There's no actual hold music. You can just play it in your head. Okay, cool. There we go. So that looks like it installed those two plugins. We've got React Helmet and Gatsby React Helmet. So I'm assuming, through the Gatsby config, just like we did with the styled components, we will also want to add React Helmet. This is an object, so I assume that we can just go ahead and add a comma. I'm curious as to in the docs here why they're using backticks rather than just like a single quote. Is that like a Gatsby specific thing, or should we be using single quotes for that? We will find out. I'll do this. I'll stop the develop script from running. Using Gatsby plugin offline. We're not worried about that too much. Interesting though. It looks like the React Helmet has some attributes that allow you to defer it, so that if your app is available offline, or if your site has like the service workers and stuff that it needs to in order for it to work offline, you can defer this so that it doesn't have to wait for the information to be passed down to it. That's interesting. That might be something we look into eventually, depending on whether or not we end up having like a blog, or if we need some bit of information to be available to users offline. That's pretty cool. Cool. So I will spin that back up. let that run, and presumably we should just have helmet available to us now. I didn't get any errors, so that's good. So kind of similar to how we added our global styles into our layout component, which is just the component that's going to be added to every single page template. We will want to add our header information into this same layout. React Helmet gives you a this component that allows you to pass in whether it's a title. There's quite a bit of extra options and stuff. Let's go to the actual React Helmet. GitHub repo. Yeah, so it gives us this helmet component that essentially can act as a higher order component if we add markup inside of it. So what I'm probably going to do here is I'm probably going to add a new component. Actually, we'll put this in a folder. So we'll make a new folder called components. I'm going to make another new folder in here called global. Although maybe we can just leverage this through theme, because theme is probably, yeah, we'll do that. We will need the components folder eventually, but it seems like it makes sense to throw global components into the theme. So yeah, we'll go ahead and just do that. So we'll make a new file here called header.js. We will do pretty much the same things that we did here. In our layout, we're going to import React. We're going to import helmet, which is apparently a named export specifically from React Helmet. And that should give us access to the helmet component. And then what I will do here is we're going to, we probably actually want to rename this specifically to just head.js to match the HTML element associated with head. So how should we do this? I suppose that we can just we can, there's no state or anything that needs to be associated with us. So we'll just make a const head as a stateless functional component that just returns some stuff. Export default head. And then through here, we will just do helmet. And I guess like the most basic way that we can test this here is to just add like a site title. You're going to judge me for having to look up the actual like syntax for a site title like this. But all it is a title tag. I haven't had to like actually write one of these myself in a really long time. So that's, there you go. We'll just call this House of Giants and save that. And then from our layout component, all we're going to need to do is just import the head component, and this should do it automatically for me from here. We'll put that above the global styles. It shouldn't matter. It all ends up getting output by at compile time, right? So I'll save that. There's no errors. And it just ended up hot module reloading for us, and the title's there. So if you look at the markup, this is probably hard to see. And actually, you know what? It's frustrating. I'm going to go ahead and blow up that text a little bit so it's easier for you folks to read. Shoot. I'll run through this one more time just to make sure that it was nice and clear. Anyway, in the inspector, I'll blow that up a little bit too. We can see that titles being output here. It looks like Gatsby does some default meta tag output and stuff like that, and this ends up being output at the very end. I wonder if there's a way to change the order of how that outputs. I don't think that it actually matters too much. It probably doesn't matter too much. The like code OCD in me wants this to be all the way at the top here, like the first thing on the page, but I'm not sure that we have that level of control. The Gatsby say it like that. Clear that because those errors are giving me a little bit of anxiety too. Okay, cool. Sweet. So yeah, just so that you can see what we were working with here when we built out this component. My text was too small. Sorry about that. Super basic component, stateless functional component, just set to a variable. We imported helmet as a named import from React Helmet, and then just used the basic component helmet tag to output a title called House of Giants, which is the name of the site. And that's pretty much it. Super straightforward. We added that component to the layout component in our theme, and it should be output on every page that leverages this layout component. So when we do go and add an about page, we're going to need to wrap it with layout. We may end up calling layout something a little bit different, just to kind of have it make a little bit more sense in the context of what this thing is actually doing. This is the hardest part of developing anything, is like naming stuff like this. So we'll think on that for a little bit and figure out what that should actually be renamed to. Because this is definitely doing more than just laying out. This is like this is like a site wrapper or something like that. Maybe that's what we'll end up calling it, a site wrapper. In any case, I don't want to get too hung up on that. So yeah, cool, perfect. So we've got a head component that is outputting some helmet stuff. From here, we should be able to just do any of the normal stuff that we would expect to be able to do in the head. So if you need to update the meta tags or add some OG meta tags or whatever for social media and stuff like that, you can do that here. Or in our case, what we're going to do is just add a link to some Google Fonts. And let me turn on wrap here to make that a little bit more tolerable, so we're not scrolling all the way around. Awesome. So I'll save that. This should automatically update. And we've got our Google Fonts in here, which is great. Which means that we can kind of start to do some work with the typography, right? So the first thing that we'll need to do is in variables, we can set the header and body copy here. So below the colors, probably I'll export const typography. Although I don't think that we'll need this to be an object like we will colors. Maybe we will. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. In any case, so I'll do header font. And from Google Fonts, we'll just copy and paste the output of the... is this interesting? It falls back to a cursive font, which I probably actually very much don't want that to be the case, so we'll change that from cursive. I'm going to have to change these quotes in here to double quotes. So from cursive, we'll just do sans serif, or this is actually a serif, so we'll set it to fall back to a serif. Then we'll export const body font to, oops, it's just open sans. Or no, I'm doing Roboto here. So this pairing looks good enough to me for now. So we'll call this Roboto sans serif. And we don't need the quotes around this one since it's a one-word font name, you generally only want the quotes around font names that are have like a space or are multiple words and or have weird characters and stuff like that. So yeah, no quotes here, quotes there. I suppose I mean it won't hurt anything, so we can export const typography, an object that just has both of these in case we need both and don't want to import them both individually. So yeah, we'll just do that. Header font, body font, and call that good. So we'll save that. We have those variable names saved. So in our site reset, we can set the font family for the body to be font family. And we're going to import this variable, and I think it should do this for me automatically. We don't need to import both of them, so I will just import the body font from variables. It added it to line 3 there, right next to colors automatically. So we'll save that. And presumably, if we were to inspect and look at the body, this throws me off every time, and I'm not sure why this is the case, but I think it has something to do with the global CSS. But the hot module reloading for this file in particular doesn't seem to work very well. So we have to refresh, and when we do, we see that the body is now applying that font family bit that we just wrote out. So that's good. If we look now in typography, in our typography styles, we can apply the heading font family to all of the headings. So we'll do H1 through H6 here. H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll remove this margin for now because we do want some of the default margin to apply. Oops. Oops, it's 5 and 6. So we've got that. We'll do font family, and we'll import the variable. What did I call it? Header font. And this should apply. Awesome. So now we can kind of go through here and add some of the more specific styles and stuff. So for our H1s, we don't want all of it. So my initial desire right here is just to, on the index page, I'm going to remove this test component for right now because we really don't need that anymore. That was more just an example to show from a couple weeks ago. So I will remove colors since we're not using those variables specifically to style stuff here right now. What I will do, however, is add a class to this H1. So in our typography, what we'll do is we'll add a modifier class to our heading. So if we have a heading that we want to be like ultra giant or something like that, we'll just call it ultra. It sounds cool. Yeah, ultra. If we want it to be super big, we can set the font size to something ridiculous. We'll say like 10 rems for right now. And if we go back into index and add the class name of ultra here, we should presumably need to refresh. There we go. That's looking better. So instead of hello world, we'll call this House of Giants. And how do I want this laid out? It actually probably doesn't matter too much right now. So cool. Yeah, we've got that at least set up there. You do want to be careful, especially with these like global class names and stuff like this. You do want to be careful to not set too many things as global. You want to componentize and kind of scope things as specifically as possible, because you got to keep in mind that like you are outputting a bunch of CSS in the head of the document here. So if you end up an example like an example that I've seen in the past, and one that I'm like dealing with right now on another project actually, is how you leverage, like if you're using Bootstrap or Tailwinds or some sort of CSS framework that has a bunch of like globally defined class names that are something as simple as like, class name flex has display flex. Someone made a joke about this on Twitter like yesterday and talked about it, but like it is dangerous to leverage these types of like one line class names, especially in a context like this when you're using styled components. You don't want thousands of lines of CSS to technically be global because you're not sure when you're going to use it or not. It ends up degrading the performance. It makes it a lot more difficult to work with your app, because then your site, because then you're going to have a pretty large mix of styled components and like global class names and stuff like that. So you do definitely want to be careful with how you leverage these global class names. So with that said, we may not even want to do that right now. What we may end up wanting to do is to add a specific component for this header that is a styled component that leverages if we wanted to, we could add a like heading component where we pass in some props where it's like font size equals we'll say 10, and then within this component we would dictate that this prop outputs this number in addition to m's after it, or rems after it, since that's what we're using. That actually may be a better way to go about this, because then we can also for this one in particular, I'm just not sure if we are going to need to use this multiple times throughout the site. Like if we are going to want this level of control for all of our headings throughout the site. Let's not do that for now, and we'll refactor it if we get to a point where we're reusing this line of thinking, right? Like where if we think that we want another giant header like this that isn't controlled more generally by the typography globals, then we can cross that bridge when we come to it. But for now, we'll just kind of do something like this. We'll add a styled heading into here, and we'll just do styled h1. So we'll just leverage some styled components here to make this a little bit easier. So this is going to output an h1, and then we can specify exactly the styles that we want on here. So we'll use styled heading. I'll add a return there just to make it a little bit more readable. And then in here we'll do font size 10 rems. Save that. The output's going to be exactly the same. You'll notice that the class name on the h1 goes away and leverages the hashed class name that is applied through the styled components. So cool. That should be good for what we want there. And through here too, we can obviously do like, if we wanted this to be a different color, we could do colors dot I think it was shoot, I need to open up the variables. Rich black is what we're going to call that. Index colors dot rich black. And of course, it's not going to auto import for me, so we'll import colors from dot slash styles base variables. Get rid of that semicolon since we don't need that, and add a semicolon there since it's CSS. So that probably visually won't change anything because that color is pretty dark. But if we wanted to use colors dot mint cream, we should be able to do that, but it's not. Oh, is it really that light? Oh, mint cream is the background that I'm using, so that's going to be the issue there. Let's look back at the variables and use something more like tulip. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and move that back to rich black. So if we really wanted to, I mean, we could import just rich black from here to avoid having all of the colors, and it will still give us the same output. And I guess I'll do that for now until we need multiple colors, at which point then we'll add the colors variable back in there. But this for now at least gets us a set of typographic styles. This allows us to import some Google fonts and change the font family based on the variables that we've set here and the stuff that we did in the head here. So that's really all for basic like document header management. There's not a whole lot to it. One thing that we can dive into, however, is getting the like project data out from Gatsby through like GraphQL. Actually, let's do that. Let's dive into that a little bit. I don't have a lot of experience with that myself, so this will be an interesting, nice little learning experience for us. This Gatsby specific package page doesn't really dive into that too much, but what we can do is look at some examples. Jason Langsdorf does a bunch of like he streams as well. If you haven't looked at his channel, you definitely should. He does a lot of really cool, interesting stuff on Twitch. As a matter of fact, here I'll just add that to the Twitch chat just in case anyone wants to look at that. But he does a lot of really cool, interesting stuff and is incredibly good at teaching and explaining Gatsby based stuff. A lot of his streams are Gatsby based, but they always touch on different pieces of technology, whether it's just like straight up React stuff or integrating different things with Gatsby and React and all of that type of stuff. So his stream is awesome. If you're interested, definitely go check that out. But his personal website is apparently listed as an example on the package for React Helmet. So let's go look at how he's leveraging some of this. And actually, this is perfect because this is more or less where we want to go. I feel like we can probably find a tutorial within here, but let's just look through this and kind of see what's going on. So Gatsby gives you access to a couple of components and tools that you can use to actually like interact with the GraphQL on that comes with Gatsby. So it looks like he's grabbing a static query and just the GraphQL tool from Gatsby itself. He's calling this component SEO, which makes sense because a lot of this is SEO based for sure. And then he's essentially just doing a static query that uses GraphQL to grab specifically the data that he's going to need to output in the head there. So you got title, description, site URL, image, author name, organization, all of that type of stuff, the Twitter stuff and the Facebook app ID, all of these things for social meta tags. So that's cool. This is probably a more expanded version of where we're going to end up here. And then it ends up just rendering out the site metadata and then leveraging that with the title. So instead of doing what we did here, where we just hard coded the name of the site, you can leverage the title and SEO title from your site metadata. Cool. So let's look and see if we can kind of find a explainer on how to get into some of that GraphQL stuff. Your first GraphQL query. Here we go. Awesome. So it looks like this example is leveraging some site metadata to actually grab the title. Perfect. Okay, cool. So we will run through this and see where we can get. So when building sites, you'll probably want to reuse common bits of data like the site title. In the steps above, it looks like they created some pages and referencing those here. What if you want to change the site title in the future? Place for these common bits of data is the site metadata object in the Gatsby config file. Okay, so right within Gatsby config, right above plugins, we can add some site metadata. And here we'll just do title. And the title here is, see, they're using backticks in all of these examples. I wonder if it's just to like, there's no reason not to, because it's essentially still going to be a string. But if you ever needed to do any string interpolation within these backticks, you wouldn't have to change the markup for it. So I don't mind that forward thinking. So we'll just do House of Giants. We'll keep this example super simple like they have it for now. And then it'll be easy to take this and expand on it, you know, if you're doing your own Gatsby project or anything like that. So we've added the title to the site metadata. My assumption is that this exports gets to the GraphQL part of Gatsby through just the magic of Gatsby, I assume. So we'll just assume that there's some black magic happening there. Got to restart the development server. So we'll do that. And then within our within our head component, we're going to import GraphQL. We're going to write a query for the metadata that we've created in the Gatsby config, and then leverage that data. H1 about title from site metadata. Okay. So what we can do here, let's see. Actually, let's just get that query working in here. So in addition to React from Gatsby, we're going to import the GraphQL tool. GraphQL from Gatsby. And then this export const query. Is this query used? Retrieve the title. So this is essentially just running a query and then grabbing this information, and it gets set to a data variable, presumably. I suppose we'll find out. So what we need to do here is this is a render prop, right? That is being passed down to the component that is being rendered through here. So it's saying, hey, yeah, I guess this query probably just gets set as props on whatever component it's run within, and then it's set to the to data as like the name of that variable. So what we'll want to do in here then is something similar, where it's just data. And I wonder if it matters too much if we have export default head there. I want to put the query above this just to make myself feel better. But this also gets exported, so I'm wondering why that gets exported. Let's just see if we can. Let's just follow the example, Dom, rather than trying to figure it out yourself and see what happens. Export const query equals GraphQL with the backticks. And then from there, we want to run a query. And we want to grab information from the site, which is apparently where that Gatsby config places the site metadata that we've created as an object in there. Site metadata. And title. So we grab that, and then within the title here, we can do data.site.sitemetadata.title. Oof. We're gonna need to shorten that down a little bit because that is a mouthful. But we should be able to. So let's save that. Import React. Cannot read property site of undefined. That's not helpful. Anything in the console? React from React. Did I import? Yeah. Export default. Interesting. Maybe this will explain it a little more. So we're using a page query here. Oops. So Gatsby's GraphQL tag enables page components to retrieve data via a GraphQL query. In this guide, you'll learn how to use the GraphQL tag in your pages, as well as go a little deeper into how GraphQL tag works. Okay, so this is essentially expanding on the same path here, marking up a basic index page. This is using a stateless functional component, just like we are here. We import GraphQL from Gatsby. GraphQL, yep, from Gatsby. I didn't misspell anything. Below the homepage component declaration, export a new constant called query. Okay, so maybe this does have to come after our declaration of the component name. Cannot read property site. Okay, so data is just not coming through still. So let's just keep going. Maybe I missed a step here. Below the homepage component declaration, export a new constant called query. The name of the constant isn't important as Gatsby looks for an exported GraphQL string. Okay, so this is part of the black magic that that Gatsby does. Essentially, if you're within a page, or in our case within a component, Gatsby just looks for any exported constant, any exported GraphQL string from the file. So the constant name doesn't matter. You can only have one page query per file. Interesting. Okay. Per file. I wonder if we had multiple components that were using a query. Yeah, per file. It's saying per file, so not per page. So assume that would work. So, okay, so we've got the constant for the home page. The query will go here in the GraphQL. The query can be a named query. GraphQL is a topic in itself. I think I wrote a blog post a while ago that's like an intro to GraphQL queries. if that interests you at all, to kind of look into the actual like inner workings of GraphQL, and this goes into like actually setting up like schema and stuff within GraphQL. Gatsby does a lot of this initial stuff for you. The bit that is probably the most interesting would be the querying data part. It kind of goes through like the syntax and the naming of things within a GraphQL query. So yeah, that's a primer on it. I'm sure there are 1,000 better like deep dives into how GraphQL and stuff work, but there's something I wrote if you're interested. So here they're naming the query. They're essentially saying, hey, this is the homepage query. So we could name ours and have it be, Sitemeta query. Just to specify it a little bit more. So within there, let me make sure that it's just, there's no site there. Okay. So we've named our query just to keep with the example. We've got site metadata, and the title associated with it. That all looks good to me. So then we provide the data to the homepage component through the use of these render props, right? In here, I've done that exactly the same way, just with some spaces in there, which shouldn't matter at all. And we're implicitly returning that we want the helmet, data, site metadata, description, data, site metadata, title is what we want. GraphQL export default head. After restarting Gatsby Develop, your homepage will now display from the description. Okay, so let me save that and restart the development server. It's compiled. I'll refresh. Cannot read property site of undefined. That's super strange. Okay, so let's debug this a little bit then. So instead of implicitly returning, I'm going to turn this into a return so that we can run some console logs in here. Oh, thank you, calendar. I turned off my notifications for sure. Oh well. Okay, cool. So we're not going to implicitly return anymore. Let's just see if we're getting anything from data. Before it freaks out. So data is still just straight up undefined. Import GraphQL from Gatsby. I suppose let's check to see if this is just straight up within a page, but static query. Post data. What is a static query? Do they explain that here anywhere? Querying data in components with static query. Okay, perhaps we are just misinterpreting what needs to be done here. So this was introduced in version 2, new API that allows components to retrieve data via a GraphQL query. I bet you the way that we're trying to do this right here is only specific to pages and not necessarily components. So let's switch gears a little bit here then and give this a try. So in addition to the GraphQL utility, we'll need static query, which is a component that is run within the default export. So what we'll do here is we will change this back to an implicit return and realign everything. And then within here, this static query component accepts a render attribute that outputs the content. So if we look at Jason's example here, his render method is outputting a whole big bit of helmet code. Okay, so this is essentially what we're going to need to do from here. There's probably some his specific use case for this SEO component probably leverages some of this post data, front matter, all of that type of stuff. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Go outside. Okay. Is that what you need? You're weighing in. Chill. Okay. Right. Cool. So we'll do the same thing. So within our head component, we are going to output a static query that is self-closing, so we don't need the closing bit there. I'm going to cut this out and we will add it to a render attribute here. That is essentially just another for us, it can probably be another implicit return because we, at this point, are not setting up any consts or anything like that. Although we could, if we wanted to, but ours isn't as complex right now as this example is. So for now, we'll just do an implicit return, and if we need to, we can expand on this a little bit and not have it be an implicit return. So we'll do all that. And then the way that this query works then on a static query is we add a query attribute, which is going to then be the GraphQL bit. I wonder if we could probably set that query to a variable so that it doesn't pollute this. Let's try that and see how this works. So rather than exporting this, I'm just going to set this to a normal variable and move it above everything. And see what we can get out of that. So this query then is just going to be query. I'll save that and see where we get. Have to reload. Okay, can I get property? Okay, I guess I'll stop trying to diverge from the tutorial and just do it how they have it. See if I'm being presumptuous. And then from there, we need one of those. Just one, please. There we go. Indent that, save that. Okay, we're probably still missing some stuff then. So we've imported static query. We have that in the head. We are leveraging a query within the static query, writing it out. Sitemeta query, site metadata title. Then it renders. That's because we did not pass data down to this. Hey, look at that. So we've got the title, everything's rendering. This is all within a static query. Cool. that makes sense. Let's look. We can close that one out. I'll throw this link in the chat there too. Cool. Okay. So this is just a basic GraphQL query within a component that allows us to grab some metadata. It looks like, based on Jason's example here too, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can do. So like, I guess if we go and look at his Gatsby config, there will probably be a whole bunch of stuff in the site metadata. So he's got titles, descriptions, the site URL, an image, the author name, all of this information that we can leverage. So that's cool. So we can essentially use this Gatsby config as like a pseudo database for all of this site metadata type of stuff. So that's pretty cool. Interesting. So yeah, like we could add like organization information to this, or its name is House of Giants LLC. The URL is a bit redundant, but it's houseofgiants.com. And then the logo, when we have our logo uploaded here, we can add that. So it allows us to have a good bit of data. And then if we wanted to query for all of this, we could query for the organization. And we have to be explicit when we're writing GraphQL. So we have to get the organization name and the organization URL if we wanted to leverage those things, which right now we don't necessarily. Let's look to see if we can figure out how to add like the current page to the title. So where we'd have like a some sort of separator here, and then have it be like home or about, depending on the current page that you're on. Let's go through this too, because they actually do talk a little bit about type checking, which is, I think, definitely important. So with the above pattern, you lose the ability to type check with prop types. Generally, when you are writing React and you are passing props down to components, like we did with the data in head here, which actually we can get rid of this bit of data since that's not used. Anytime you're passing props down to a component, you generally want to leverage some sort of type checking to make sure that the data that you're getting is in the shape that you expect it to be. That's where prop types come in. If you're familiar with React, you'll have an understanding of how that works. But if not, it's just essentially a way for us to validate the data that we're getting and make sure that it is in an order that we expect it to be, so that we're not like outputting, a whole bunch of objects or something rather than a string and stuff like that. So we can do that here. This is essentially saying that type checking gets not necessarily invalidated, but you don't type check in the same way that you would with a normal React component when you're using static query. So what it's saying then is you can essentially split these two pieces out into your markup and the props. Export default props. So instead of, interesting, yeah, instead of exporting the header, you would export the props. That includes the static query and leverages the header component here. And then with that, you would be able to type check the header, make sure you get the data with the object that is the site with the object that is the site meta with the object that is the title, and make sure that the title is a string and that string is required. Interesting. So let's go ahead and do that just to kind of set ourselves up for later and just in general, because we want to make sure that we are being conducive to like good, like best practices here. So yeah, what we'll do is the same exact thing. So we will add that data back. We will leverage the helmet code within our normal head component. It will still take in the data the same exact way that we were before. The only thing that'll change is how we are outputting the static query here. So instead of exporting the head, we're going to export default props. And this is just another implicit return that returns a static query, gets the site metadata title, and then renders that data to the head, where data is equal to the data that we're getting, and any we're just spreading the props. So if there are any props that are added to head already, like if we had, you know, similar to how Jason does in his example, if we had pieces of props that we wanted to leverage when we actually use this head component, then we could. This spread operator just does that for us here. So then we'll just close that. And that should, make sure that's closed properly, then allow us to write some head.prop types. And I'm just going to copy and paste this because this is a bit nested. So we're essentially checking our data props and making sure that it is an object that contains a site key that is also an object that contains a site metadata key that is also an object that contains a title string, and all of these things are required. So if we are not getting back the data at all, then it's going to have a problem. If we went into Gatsby config and removed the title out of our site metadata here, then on compile, it's going to yell at us and say like, hey, you can't do that because this prop type is required. So presumably then, this is going to error, right? Because we're not... Okay, wait, let me... Oh, this is hard to read because the text size is so big. Unexpected token. Oh, I added an extra closing bracket. Still failed to compile. We are already exporting a default. So get rid of that. Prop types is not defined. We have to import prop types from prop types. Now it's compiled. Oh. Are you... Hello? Uh-oh. Localhost 8000. Why are you having such a hard time refreshing? It added the separator that we defined, so it seems to be working, but it just hangs. if we need to export head and then import it specifically from here. But then it won't render. Because this is exporting the default. Export default props. It is defined but never used. So then, like, how are they using this component in another file? Okay, everything's fine now. That's strange. I must have been exporting it twice or something like that, but yeah, bizarre. In any case, it seems like things are fine. Let me just like update something and see if it yells at me. Okay. It appears to not be yelling at me anymore. Cool, good. All right, sweet. So we've got that handled. We are type checking our data coming from the GraphQL query. And yeah, I think that we are good. So yeah, back to what we were doing. Let's try and figure out how we can output the current page that the user is on. Gatsby output current page in title. Let's see. We got add page metadata. Gatsby. How to build a blog. Because yeah, we want Gatsby output current page and title. Gatsby get current page. See, this is getting into routing and stuff. I just want... We may have to actually save this for another time. I might need to look into this a little bit more. to like kind of get into what exactly we should put. Yeah, you know what, let's do that. Okay. So for now, we'll just kind of keep this simple. We've gone over a decent amount. I mean, running a simple query, setting up some site metadata, figuring out how to manage your document head stuff. That's all good. I'll put a little comment in here. To do, figure out how to output current page title in title. So we'll figure that out later and kind of go over it there. But I believe that's probably good for now. This will be a nice little compact overview of how we got to the point that we're at. I think that this is in a pretty good spot for us to be able to understand how to manage our document head, use React Helmet, basic understanding of GraphQL queries, which we're going to definitely need to leverage in other parts of the site if we end up doing a blog, or if we have a portfolio that has, you know, several different portfolio pieces, and we want to query all of those pages and output, you know, a preview of those on some sort of archive page. All of that type of stuff will be expanded on from this kind of like base layer that we went over today. Yeah, I think that should that'll probably do it for today. Yeah, like I said too, I'm gonna kind of come up with a plan for the components and styles that we actually want to leverage on the site. Probably for next week, what we will anticipate doing is perhaps expanding on this a little bit more. Maybe just get like a basic navigation in there so that we can switch between pages. We know for sure that we're going to need like a home page, a contact us page, and like a portfolio page or something like that. So we'll, next week we'll dive into figuring out some routing. We have a good base site setup here. Header management, all of that type of stuff. The CSS architecture is pretty solid and looks like it's outputting stuff well. We'll definitely need to expand on some of this typography typography stuff. We'll definitely expand on this and kind of set up some legitimate like typography rules as we continue down the line here. So yeah, definitely a bite-sized chunk here. I don't know, like, especially because I always take these and I put the videos up on YouTube, and I generally don't edit it at all because I like everyone to have the context of all the stuff that we talked through. I like the fact that it's like, this is a real life example of how someone like me, I mean, I've been doing web development stuff for like 10 years. This is how I operate. This is how I work. I like to, Google around for examples because I like to dissect the code that I know is working and try to understand it myself. So yeah, these YouTube videos are generally uncut and just kind of are put out there one after the other. So I'm not, if someone has gotten to this point in the video that I end up putting on YouTube for this, let me know if like that context is helpful, or if it would be more useful for me to like edit these things down and not necessarily upload the entire stream, and all of that type of stuff. So any feedback anyone has is super welcome. And if you've gotten to this point, I appreciate you making it this far and sticking with me and learning some cool stuff about Gatsby. So yeah, with that, I will leave it there. I hope you have a great day.